The footprints stopped at the door. There were clear tracks in the snow leading from the forest to the farmhouse, but none leading away, not one. The farmer who noticed them stood there in the cold morning light, staring at the prints pressed into the frozen ground. He followed them slowly, step by step, until they reached the building. And then, nothing. Whoever had walked across that field had reached the house, but they had never left. Days later, every person inside that farmhouse would be dead. And, even more disturbing, after the murders, someone stayed there. The animals were fed, the oven was used. Footsteps were heard in the attic. It would take days before anyone realized what had happened. And by then, whatever had been inside that house was gone. In the spring of 1922, the Hinterkaifeck farm stood isolated in the countryside of Bavaria, Germany. It was not a large property, but it was remote. The nearest village was nearly a kilometer away, separated by fields and woods that became quiet and empty at night. The family who lived there followed a routine that rarely changed. Andreas Gruber, the patriarch, managed the farm. His daughter Victoria helped with the work and cared for her two children, Cecilia and Joseph. Andreas's wife, Cecilia, moved more slowly with age, but still helped in small ways. Life on the farm was simple. Animals needed feeding every morning and evening. Wood had to be chopped, water carried, meals prepared. Neighbors later recalled nothing unusual in those weeks, at least not at first. The family worked, visited the village occasionally, and returned home before dark as most farmers did. But sometime in late March, small things began to change. Andreas mentioned to a neighbor that he had found footprints in the snow leading from the forest to the house. He had followed them, expecting to see tracks leading away. There were none. He searched the buildings, the barn, even the attic. He found nothing. Yet he was uneasy. Not long after, the family discovered that a house key had gone missing. Then, one day, a newspaper appeared inside the house, one no one in the family had purchased or brought home. At night, they began hearing footsteps in the attic. Slow, measured, occasional, and then silence. Still, life went on. The animals needed feeding, the fields needed tending, and whatever was happening above their heads remained unseen. On March 31st, a new maid arrived to work at the farm. Previous servants had left suddenly, claiming the house was haunted, that they heard strange sounds at night. But work was hard to find, and the new maid agreed to stay. That evening, the farm was quiet. Smoke rose from the chimney. Lamps were lit. The family prepared for night as they always did. Sometime after sunset, someone, or something, began calling members of the family into the barn, one at a time. No one knows exactly how it happened, but investigators later concluded that Andreas was likely the first to go, then his wife, then Victoria, then young Cecilia. Each was killed in the barn with a farm tool. Inside the house, the maid and the 2-year-old boy were killed later. What makes this crime particularly unsettling is what happened next. For days after the murders, the farm did not fall silent. Neighbors noticed smoke rising from the chimney. The animals were fed. A postman delivered mail but saw no one. A mechanic passing through reported seeing someone near the property. Whoever had committed the murders had not fled immediately. They remained. They lived in the house, slept there, cooked there, walked through rooms where the dead still lay, and then, at some point, they vanished. At first, investigators believed the case might be simple. Robbery seemed possible. Farms sometimes kept cash or goods that could be stolen. Perhaps a traveler or criminal had come looking for supplies and killed the family when confronted. It was a plausible theory. But as police examined the scene, it began to fall apart. Money was still in the house. Valuables remained untouched. Nothing had been taken that would justify such violence. If robbery had been the motive, why stay afterward? Why continue feeding animals and lighting fires? Why remain in a house filled with the bodies of those you had just killed? The theory that once seemed reasonable began to collapse, leaving only deeper questions behind. Over the years, Many explanations have been suggested, each attempting to make sense of what happened at Hinterkaifeck. One possibility is that the killer was someone the family knew. A neighbor, a former worker, or someone familiar with the farm's layout could have moved around unnoticed, hiding in the attic or barn. This would explain how the intruder knew routines and was able to remain unseen for days. It explains the footprints. It explains the noises in the attic. But it does not explain why no one ever confessed or was proven responsible, despite years of investigation and interrogation. Another theory suggests the murders were the result of a personal conflict or long-standing resentment. Life in rural communities could be tense, with disputes over land, money, and relationships sometimes lasting years. Someone with a personal motive might have committed the crime and stayed briefly to delay discovery. But even this leaves unanswered questions. Why remain so long in such a dangerous situation? Why risk being seen by neighbors or travelers? Then there are the more unsettling possibilities. Ideas that are harder to explain, but difficult to dismiss entirely. Some investigators and writers have speculated that the killer may have been living on the property before the murders, secretly occupying the attic or outbuildings. Imagine the fear of realizing too late that someone had been watching you, listening to your conversations, moving above your ceiling at night. That possibility changes the story from a crime into something far more disturbing, because it means the danger was already inside the house long before the violence began, and it raises a quiet, lingering question. How long had someone been there before the family ever knew? The Hinterkaifeck murders remain officially unsolved. More than a century has passed, and the farmhouse itself no longer stands. It was demolished years after the crime, the buildings removed, the land returned to fields. Today there is little to see, just open ground, wind moving through, grass, and a small memorial marking where the house once stood. But what lingers is not the physical place. It is the sequence of moments that led to that night. Footsteps in the snow that never returned. Sounds in the attic that were never explained. A key that disappeared. Small details that, at the time, must have seemed unsettling but manageable, until they were not. Because whatever was happening at Hinterkaifeck did not begin with the murders. It began days earlier, perhaps weeks, in quiet sounds and unexplained signs, in the sense, hard to describe but impossible to ignore, that something was wrong. And perhaps the most haunting thought is this: if the family had left when they first noticed the footprints, would they have survived? If stories like this stay with you, if you find yourself thinking about them long after the last image fades, there are more waiting to be explored. You can follow this channel to continue uncovering true stories, real mysteries, and the echoes of events history never fully explained.